currently hiding in the Ghostbusters firehouse. 2016 Ghostbusters, and I want to make sure I make people upset that I didn't pick the classic one, which is actually the same building, but go figure. Welcome to HIAC Talk Radio, the HIAC Wrestling Podcast. It's not the Craig Lagan Show, no matter helmet binding yum. No matter how many times Harry tries and says it's not a joke, the little idiot will never be correct about me. Dan Law 83, follow me. You see at the bottom of the screen. Follow Craig Lagans at Craig Lagans. It's at the bottom of the screen. You can see it right below me. I just wanted to start this off. Yes, my background is awesome. I know. Thank you, Daniel. I just want to start this off with discuss. I just finished watching the Dark Side of the Ring that Vice did this week, and it was the John Stossel, little bitch John Stossel. I said it. Interview. Those are Punisher pajamas, Danielle. Craig is modeling the latest in Punisher nightwear, PJ wear, and it comes complete with legs, and from the top to bottom, he is the Punisher tonight.
Yes, I go top and I go bottom.
Yes,
Dad.
Yes, me as well. I'm not wearing pants. That's the normal thing. So anyway. So
the bitch slap heard around the world, or as you call it, the John Stossel bitch hour, or the John Stossel pussy hour.
Oh my God! What a whiny bitch! 30 years later, he provoked the guy to slap him. He got slapped, and he's still crying about it. Much like Harry's going to point out, because he's a one-track mind, and he repeats the same thing. I cry about WCW 20 years later. I don't really. Good, Danielle. That's the best news I've heard all day. That the whole thing is a cluster f of a mess, Craig, and of course I loved at the end that they had 5 minutes to kill. They snuck in the Hulk Hogan got bitch slapped story, which Hogan wouldn't have lied about anything before. I would have never heard him trying to he wrote a whole script for that.
Yeah,
Andre the Giant match that we only found out about finally after all these years. Just magically appeared the script.
Magically appeared when there happens to be an HBO documentary on him.
I will say, well, look, the star's on me. Spotlight, me, spotlight. I will say this. You can't hit a guy.
No.
It's against the law. That's obviously, duh. Let's start there, but I did not know about and now I'm blanking on his name. The wrestler that did the interview with him. Eddie Mansfield. I had no idea that part of it happened. I had no idea he did an interview for it. Go ahead, Craig.
I'm sorry. Well, because I'm old enough to remember when it happened live. When it happened at the Madison Square Garden show, it was in the Inquirer. I'm in Philadelphia now. Also, keep in mind, I'm in college in Florida at the time, God. It made the paper in the Inquirer that John Stossel was hospitalized after getting struck by professional wrestler Dave Schultz. This was national news, okay? And when it aired on 2020, the following Friday, that's when we saw the first time we saw the footage of and the whole series, because 2020, and this is network TV, so there was no other cable show. So 2020 was getting 25 to 26 million viewers every week. So this was a big deal. So it was their expose on professional wrestling. They spent the night at Madison Square Garden watching the matches, and they showed the guy. They're trying to show him in slow motion. I believe it was the Briscoes, Jack and Jerry against Dick Murdoch and Adrian Adonis, and how they would hit him and they would show them the punches in slow motion. See, they're not even connecting with their heads and everything. And then they showed Eddie Mansfield, and they showed his clips from when Eddie Mansfield was a Continental Heartthrob. He wrestled in Georgia during the brief period and in the Continental areas. He was kind of like a Gina Hernandez light, in that he was smaller and lighter than Gina Hernandez and nowhere nearly as good. But Eddie Mansfield had won some regional titles. And for whatever reason, Eddie Mansfield decided to share all the trade secrets with John Stossel, including the turnbuckle. He had John Stossel body slam him and, even bladed on camera. And the business was so protected back then, Dan, that even when it aired, the wrestling magazines, the After magazines, were saying we're still trying to keep kayfabe. When they showed the slow motion punches, they said it didn't connect because Murdoch's trying to get out of the way of Briscoe's punches, and they correctly showed that they never showed the camera when Eddie Mansfield went to Blade. They showed Stossel's reaction to it, like ugh, but the camera never showed him doing this. So their Pro Wrestling Illustrated stance was it was a cutaway shot and it was edited. So again, they're still trying to protect the business. But when he approached David Schultz backstage in Madison Square Garden, now I was already familiar with Dave Schultz from the AWA.
Yeah,
this is the great migration from the AWA to the WWF when not only Hogan came over to start Hulkamania and WrestleMania, but Gene Okerlund and Kurt Hennig and Tito Santana and Dave Schultz, because Hogan was bringing in all of his buddies. Because when Hogan was selling out the AWA arenas, which I'll get to later in the Wrestling Historian, with David Schultz, they always worked well together. I had no idea they were as close as they were. That was one of the things that got me in the Dark Side of the Ring special, that they were legitimately tight. That Hogan stayed with Schultz. I know that Hogan tried to get all of his AWA buddies over to the WWF. Another one of the Jesse Ventura, who I know he's not close with, but Jesse Ventura also came over to the WWF with Hulk Hogan from the AWA. But the backstage confrontation between Stossel and Dave Schultz, and Dave Schultz was a guy with legitimate badass. I remember the WWF. They're going to see At Home with Dave Schultz. I didn't know that was they were all actors. It now it goes to reason when Dave was going to smack his little kid and the kid was smiling the whole time. I said, "Well, he doesn't seem to be afraid of his dad." But now I know. I bought it. Even though I was 18, I saw this. Yeah, and the cops were called and said domestic abuse and get those kids out of there, and I fear for his wife. But I didn't know they're all actors. But
so
back
funny.
to the John Stossel thing, he never asked Dave Schultz, is wrestling fake? He just said, I think it's fake. And you see right before that, Schultz went to, I want to hit you so bad. So right then, I knew it was coming. Even if I never saw it before, I knew it was coming. It looked like Schultz already had that look, like, I'm going to smack you anyway.
He has this thing, like, he's made the decision. He has this look on his face. His eyes do the... like, he's made the decision. He's about to smack the crap out of this guy.
Yes.
So, it's like... he did, but the thing is, it's annoying. He doesn't even ask the question. He just says, I think it's fake. All right, well...
Which is the exact last thing to say to a guy like David Schultz, because now out of all the people, and Jim Cornette was also on the Dark Side of the Ring, who knows David Schultz from, because David Schultz from Tennessee, he started wrestling in the Tennessee area, and Jim Cornette was familiar with him. He was trained by Herb Welch, who was one of the great shooters in professional wrestling history. So Dave Schultz was already a legitimate tough guy. And a credit to Dave Schultz, because he's never hurt anyone in the ring. So he knows what he was doing, even though he's physically capable of hurting anyone he's in the ring with. And he is 6'5", so he's a big guy and he's a tough guy. But out of all the people, if John Stossel says, I'm going to talk to one of the wrestlers backstage and ask him if it's fake. Out of all the people, he picks David Schultz. Okay, not a Barry Windham, not a Mike Rotundo, who are also there, who were good guys. Who you would think would be a little safer, but he goes to the antithesis of John Stossel. He goes to the mirror image of John Stossel. If you're a funhouse mirror, you're John Stossel, you're 5'8", 125 pounds soaking wet with a brick, and you go to talk to the toughest He-Man, toughest Southern redneck you can possibly have. New York John Stossel, Southern David Schultz.
He's not even really New York John Stossel. He's that's the New York John Stossel.
Yeah, and but we had to and it was under direction of Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon, who was backstage. I don't know why that was a revelation to some people. I didn't know that Vince was there. Yeah, he was there the
Of
whole
course he was
time. It's
there.
the
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden show, and that's still the main headquarters of the WWF at the time. And he knew 2020 was going to be there, so why of course Vince would be there. And he said to Dave Schultz, there's a reporter from 2020 here, blast him. Those were his words. Now, Vince can backpedal and say, I meant verbally blast him. Dave Schultz heard blast him, and he was, obviously not quick to smack a guy anyway. That's all the incentive he needed. So when John Stossel didn't ask him a question, he said, I think it's fake. There it goes. And that's the first time I heard Stossel, and I've read interviews with Schultz after that. He did an interview with Wrestling 85, one of the After magazines, but it was his only interview he did after, because Schultz had at that point had been blackballed from the WWF, and he was only taking indie dates. But the only interview he did, Stossel said he got his ears boxed, and Schultz said, if you look at the tape, I never came close to hitting the guy in the ears. The first time it was against the cheek, and the second time was right against the top of the head.
Top of the head, yeah.
Yeah, and with obviously with Schultz's hands, and they're so big and it slapped so hard. Even if you hit me on the elbow, if Dave Schultz slapped me on the elbow, my ears would be ringing.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not because you hit him in the ear, Dave. It's because you hit him so hard. It probably shook his head.
First time was against the face, and the second time was the top of the head. And this is the first time I heard from John Stossel. Not the first time I heard, but in so many years since that. I have a revelation that I didn't know about beforehand. Was there one that you weren't aware of?
Well, yeah, the Mansfield revelation. I didn't know anything about that. I never saw any of the footage. They showed him showing what the blade was, and I've never seen any of that. The only footage I've ever seen of it was the Stossel Schultz altercation. Mm-hmm. Wasn't really an altercation. It was a big man slapping a smaller man. Just
the one revelation to me now, the thing that according to Dave Schultz and according to so many people, what got him kicked out of the WWF was his fight with Mr. T. Now, I had always heard that leading up to WrestleMania, Mr. T was invited to a house show by Hogan when they were doing a house show at the LA Sports Arena. And I had heard that Dave Schultz saw Mr. T's entourage and said, it's only supposed to be wrestlers back here, and get out and leave. And he got into it with Mr. T and his entourage. And because of that, Schultz was asked to leave, or was told to leave. And after that, he was done with the WWF. Hulk Hogan tells a story that Mr. T was sitting ringside, and Dave Schultz out of nowhere just comes up and just smacks Mr. T and gets into it with all his entourage, and then he's arrested and carted off. Dave Schultz, his version, the first time I've heard this, he said he saw Mr. T backstage at the LA Sports Arena. Now, he admitted he was already resentful to Mr. T for getting all this treatment, like a lot of the boys were.
Yeah.
That Mr. T just walks in off the street and he's getting money that none of the wrestlers had ever gotten before, and he's getting it just for showing up. But even then, he said, I walked up, I was talking to Mr. T, and they didn't have any beef. And in fact, they even showed a picture of Mr. T and Dave Schultz, shaking hands, and there was a picture of them. And it was Jay Strongbow who told Schultz to leave. Yeah, he wasn't supposed to be back there. That T and his posse were fine. It's Schultz who had to leave. And then Dave Schultz said when he went later on during the matches, he went to say hi to his friend Professor Toru Tanaka, who Schultz had known from when he started back in Tennessee. He was sitting next to Mr. T. He went to say hi to Tanaka and said hi to T. And Jay Strongbow again told Schultz to leave. And according to Schultz, that's when the officers came and he had to be hogtied, face down on the ground, handcuffed, legs cuffed, guns drawn at his head. Um, so I got three versions of it, but I tend to believe Schultz's version, not so much that they needed a militia to take him out, but
Yeah.
that he didn't have a beef with Mr. T, but because Strongbow, probably under orders from Vince, didn't want Schultz anywhere near a wrestling match or anywhere near anyone that wasn't a wrestler, because the last time he went with someone who wasn't a wrestler, John Stossel, things went bad. So that was the first time I actually heard Schultz's version of the Mr. T incident, because I always thought it was because he got into a fight with Mr. T that eventually got him ousted from the WWF.
It's just after the slap, it's just a typical story of Vince saying something, doing something completely different, and not taking care of the boys. And then you get to the Hogan Belzer thing, and
Yeah,
that how that was handled, and then cut to a couple of years later when the whole steroid thing, and then years later with Whitman and Jersey about that it's not a sports competition, it's sports entertainment, and just it's like you just see Dave Schultz sitting on the silent going, wait a minute, I did what you told me. What the
yeah. He did what he was told, and even Eddie Mansfield felt a little vindication. It's like, well, that's what I've been saying. That it's.
I don't know, Eddie. I don't know how I feel about that, because he was right about. Well, we've just seen it the last month during the coronavirus about WWE doing something and just completely effing over 20 people or 21 people in one shot.
Mm-hmm.
And where he gets into it, where he felt vindicated, it was like, wrestling does not take care of the people. Yeah. Wrestling promoters will do what they need to do to make money, and then when they're done, you're gone. It's been a practice for over 100 years or more. We know this. Just like everything else in the world, and I won't get too political, we just let it happen. If we don't say anything. And the show must go on. But it's the same thing. It just unfolded then on a smaller scale with Dave Schultz. You can't hit a guy, but if you say, we got this, don't worry about it. I mean, he covered up Snooka's murder. He gave a little briefcase, walked into the room with the cops, and gave the briefcase, and that was it. And, we had years of praising Snuka, even though he murdered a woman. Mm-hmm. So,
I don't know why Schultz couldn't have been handled either. And I loved how his good buddy Hulk Hogan never came to his defense either. And Hogan had, and just like promoters that don't take care of their people, Hogan's always been a guy that, nicest, friendliest guy backstage, but wouldn't care if you made, as long as he made $1, wouldn't care if you made a dime.
Listen, about Hogan is a smart businessman. Hogan took care of business first and his business first, and you can't fault him for that. He did good work in the ring. Not as good as some of the other greats that should be held a little higher than him, but again, that's another discussion for another time. As a person, Hogan's a piece of garbage, and it's fake, just like it's fake. It's a persona. It's not real. The take a prayer, say your vitamin. He brings up the God thing when it suits him, when he's in trouble or he's done something stupid. He's also a lying scumbag. That's Hogan. I know people that'll upset some people. Hogan was a good wrestler and a good businessman. Can't deny that. Look at all the money he made and all the things he did in wrestling. He's also a scumbag. Yeah. And he lied about this too.
Yeah. And he's not the first scumbag to make a lot of money and
not at all.
Sell a lot of tickets. With Eddie Mansfield, Eddie Mansfield just said what so many wrestlers have always said, that he was experiencing it on a smaller scale. Eddie Mansfield was never a huge draw. He could have been like an Austin Idol type, like I said, he held titles in every promotion he wrestled in the South and in Los Angeles and other spots. But the fact that he saw the injustice, he saw how much he was making compared to how much that the promoters were making, and he would be main event in some arenas, and his payoff would be light. And comparatively speaking to a lot of the others, yeah. And he spoke up about it, which is fine if you feel you're being ripped off. And any wrestler, especially back in the '80s, will tell you, even when wrestling in the '80s was, you know, the number one spectator sport without drawing NBA games, that wrestlers weren't getting anywhere near paid enough considering the amount of travel they put on,
Not at all.
and
Not even close.
they had no, liability. I mean, Bret Hart said it best that the guy that cleans up the ring after the match, that picks up all the trash, has more benefits than we do.
Yeah. Isn't
Um,
that always the
so
way?
yeah, so obviously he's right to speak up about it, but he did it on a larger scale, and it's an Eddie Mansfield saying it. But to see how even just the scale of it, Eddie Mansfield said it, and he got blackballed from wrestling, and he was it. But Sergeant Slaughter at the height of the WWF's popularity, because when people always ask, well, if Hogan wasn't there, who would be if WWF went global, who would carry? Sergeant Slaughter was already there, and he was drawing sellout crowds because he just turned on the Iron Sheik, so he was the number two babyface in the company, and so popular that when Hogan would wrestle main event on one side of the country, Slaughter can main event house show on the other side of the country. But Slaughter wanted, because they were getting so national media attention, wanted then said now was the best time for us to unionize. If we're ever going to get our fair share or a fair cut, and since we're global, we're national now, why not make it easier for all of us or your stars? And of course Hogan, back to Hogan, stooged Slaughter out to Vince, saying Slaughter wants to unionize, and what do you know? Slaughter at the height of his popularity is gone from the WWF, just like that. So but he's Sergeant Slaughter, so he went on, and his popularity didn't wane everywhere he went. He was still he got to carve out a decent living for himself.
Yeah.
And Eddie Mansfield speaks up, and you're blackballed to this day. You could hear the venom and vitriol that Jim Cornette has for him, and that Dave Schultz has for him, and that a lot of wrestlers still have for him.
What does Cornette have these days other than venom and vitriol? I mean, that's his thing.
Eddie Mansfield was a has been and never was and never will be, and
I was like, he's all right, Jim, but you can't, don't tell him that. Mm-hmm. I didn't say that. Please don't tell him that. No, Jim, this guy that you don't know said that Mansfield was okay, and you're wrong. I'm gonna kill him.
But I will never, Eddie Mansfield's always going to be ostracized for exposing the business.
Yeah.
Eddie Mansfield, did it before anyone.
Yeah.
It lifted the veil in professional wrestling when he did this on the 2020 show on ABC network television. Professional wrestling was scrambling to discredit Eddie Mansfield as quickly as they could.
Yeah,
because even back in 1985. The idea was to still protect the business. Even though Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper were part of it, still had to protect the business.
Yeah. 5 years later,
yep.
All over.
All that
but I was gonna say, at least Dave seems like he did years of bounty hunting. He was damn good at it. And he seems happy. I don't think he misses it in that way. I don't think so.
Yeah, I think I do think because Dave Schultz is such a Dave Schultz guy that no matter you just said he'll land on his feet is doing so many other things that hold his interest. I think he what he sounded like, Dave. I'm going to use a rock and roll reference here. He sounded like Sammy Hagar. He said I don't have any regrets. I enjoyed the time I had. It just sucked the way it ended.
Yeah.
And he, like Sammy, he's doing okay. He was going to be okay, and like Dave Schultz is going to be okay. And I think Jim Cornette said it best. Had he stayed, had Vince made that go away, like he's helped other murderers get off,
sure.
Whatever. It would have, the WWF was headed towards a cartoony way. I don't see Dave Schultz doing that. I don't see him putting on a costume and being one of the cartoon WWF guys. I do see him eventually. I saw him will probably go to the NWA. Had he left the WWF on his own accord, I could have seen him going to world class and making a lot of money down there, or even going to Tennessee with Jerry Lawler in the 80s
Oh
and
God, yeah.
doing big business there. Um, but I agree with what Jim Cornette said. It would have ended anyway, just because Dave Schultz being Dave Schultz. Something else would have pissed him off. Um, and he maybe not would have reacted that way, but he definitely would not have been one of the WWF company guys, especially when he went to Vince and said, "Hey, why don't you write something down?" And said, "Hey, you directed me to say to do this, not to hit John Stossel, but you said in your own words, blast him. So why don't we put this down on paper and we can make this lawsuit go away?" But
In
nope.
10 years time or less, we're gonna have that Vince McMahon Dark Side of the Ring, and there's gonna be a group of people that will be like, "Wait, what?" And be like, "Yeah, we've been telling you about this forever. Like, where have you been?" Just
Yeah.
doesn't claim responsibility for anything, and that's what you can do when you're a promoter at that level.
Yeah. Yeah. Not everyone, but yeah, but Vince, yeah. But again, I cannot say enough great things about Dark Side of the Ring.
That's a good show. I'm
Absolutely
really looking forward
love
to
that.
next week.
Herb Abrams,
Oh my,
woo!
Vaseline and Coke.
Now,
I can't wait.
now with every single subject beforehand, I knew a little bit. Some I knew a lot about. Others I knew a little about, and a lot. Some I heard, with Dino. I heard this story with Dave Schultz. I heard a lot of rumor and innuendo, but now I got the truth. Herb Abrams is nothing but legend to me.
Yeah.
I know about the UWF pay per view. I know about dealings, and all I have is stories. So I don't even want to. This is the one I'm looking forward to
The most.
most because, yeah, if any guy deserves to have a movie, and a lot of
It's
wrestlers
Herb.
do, but the Herb Abrams story, that's one I'm looking forward to. But yeah, Dark Side of the Ring, Dave Schultz. If you haven't, or even just go back on everything that we talked about is on YouTube. Watch the whole 2020 episode with John Stossel, the whole because they devoted the entire hour to professional wrestling. They showed the Eddie Mansfield clip. They showed the clips from Madison Square Garden from the house show that night, how it was packed. One of the great revelations that this is back in the day, Dan, or wrestling fans. The Madison Square Garden shows had to be done by 11 o'clock. There was an 11
Yeah.
o'clock curfew. So even if a match was going on, they would ring the bell and say the match has gone to a curfew. So it's 11 o'clock, so the match is over. In the 2020 report, they said they showed Vince McMahon talking to Barry Windham, saying that they have the curfew's coming up at 11 o'clock, and it was like 10:55 or something. And when you know, Barry Windham defeated Mr. Fuji in 12 seconds, right underneath the 11 o'clock. But the WF spun it. That Barry Windham is one of the greatest wrestlers in the world. This is before he and Mike Rotunda would be the tag team champions. Barry Windham had just gotten there, so he was getting an unbelievable push. But yeah, he beat Mr. Fuji in 12 seconds. When you know it, right before the 11 o'clock curfew.
Oh man.
But yeah, check it all. It's all on YouTube, and including the slap.
I did enjoy Stossel's distance FU to Dave Schultz. Like he's going to do something. Like I said, Stossel's always been a little weasel, a little whiner, and he still is. And he did. I don't know if he thought he was going to look good going on that show and talking about it. He did not come off looking good.
No, and John Stossel, to his credit, before that, had always done a great job as an investigative reporter. He knows the stuff. He knows it really well. And the reason he got to that point is because he did uncover a whole lot of truths that Americans didn't know. It was John Stossel who brought out the number of lung cancer patients that were connected to smoking.
Oh.
And the big tobacco industry. Someone would credit John Stossel for the reason why they stopped having cigarette ads on TV, because of John Stossel's findings on lung cancer and smoking patients. But going to professional wrestling, it's like, but again, out of all the people to interview, why you pick the guy that has the meanest look on his face? I mean, you understand the boys stayed away from Dave Schultz because they didn't want to get on his bad side. So if you're a reporter, an investigative reporter looking to rip the lid off pro wrestling, you don't start with Dave Schultz.
It's like, never mind. That's like going into the Hart dungeon when Stu Hart was still training and going, Stu, I think this is fake, and everybody leaving the room like, oh no.
Oh
And
Lord.
then just going upstairs.
Yeah.
Ah!
And listen to the screams as they take to the bed at night. Yeah.
That's my favorite. Have some discipline. Dean and I used to reference that all the time. We were talking about somebody. Have some discipline.
And discipline.
Oh, have some discipline.
Yeah. Eddie, Stu Hart, as told by Adam Sandler. Have some discipline. Are you able to do? Discipline. Well, Dan, as long as we're back in 1984 and back when wrestling was wrestling, why don't we stay there? Okay, just a little while. Yeah, well, if it's okay with you, a little while longer. Sure. We're gonna go back to when investigative reporters roamed the halls of Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, I think it's fake.
Yeah. And we're gonna go back to the days where territories ruled the landscape that is not sports entertainment. Back when you can wrestle in one territory one day and wrestle in another territory another day. And as you learned from last week's segment, you can wrestle on one tournament. You can wrestle in one territory and in another territory on the same day.
Yes.
So this is back when territories ruled the landscape, back when titles were called belts, back when sports entertainment, before New Jersey made it official, was called professional wrestling.
Thanks,
this,
Whitman.
Gentlemen and ladies, is the Wrestling Historian. Now, this is our callback episode of the Wrestling Historian because last week's segment was a very busy week in the world of professional wrestling. Because if you remember last week, I said in St. Paul, Minnesota, on April 18th, Hulk Hogan pinned the AWA Heavyweight Champion Nick Bockwinkel and won, seemingly, the AWA Heavyweight Championship. Well, April 24th, 1982, 6 days later, the AWA president Stanley Blackburn announced that the April 18th AWA title win for Hulk Hogan will be stricken from the record books because of outside interference by Bobby Heenan. He tossed a foreign object to Nick Bockwinkel. Nick Bockwinkel used it. Then Hulk Hogan used it to pin Nick Bockwinkel and win the AWA title. Because of that, the title was returned to Nick Bockwinkel, and Hulk Hogan is never considered the AWA Heavyweight Champion. That's the first of two times that Hogan had the AWA title taken from him. Again, had Vern Gagne had any sense, would have let that title stand because 1982 Hulk Hogan was drawing better houses than both world champions Bob Backlund and Harley Race at the time. Hulk Hogan was the biggest box office trash in professional wrestling. But that was 1982. The title taken away from Hulk Hogan. April 24th, 1987, Ken Patera would wrestle his first match in the first match. He was in the WWF, but it was his first match since he was let out of prison for, as we call it now, the McDonald's incident. Ken Patera did 2 years in prison for he and Mr. Saito threw a boulder through a McDonald's after it had closed and they were attempting to get food. Policemen came to their hotel room.
I love it.
And it took many policemen to get them both down. Patera, legitimately one of the strongest men in the world, threw one policeman through the doorway. The police came through the door to arrest Patera. Patera threw one of the police officers right out the door. And it took 5 of them to um, to arrest him, and he did serve prison time. And the WWF, in the first of their many uh, angles that dealing with real life and trying to exploit someone else's misfortune, decided to turn Ken Patera's real life prison sentence into an angle and tried to blame the whole thing on Bobby Heenan. Even though Bobby Heenan was not in the AWA at the time, Bobby Heenan was in the WWF when Ken Patera was arrested and thrown in jail. And Bobby Heenan, for the first time, I actually sided with him, even though he was a heel manager and the best heel manager in the world at the time. They had a debate where, because of the WWF spin cycle, blamed the whole thing on Bobby Heenan. And Bobby Heenan said, and this might have been a shoot, it might have been an angle, he said, the man is a grown man. He did this on his own. He's older than me. He should know better. And you can't blame any of this Ken Patera's stupidity on me. I always knew Ken Patera was stupid. You gonna blame me for that? You might as well arrest his parents. In birth to a stupid baby. But Ken Patera's first match was against Bobby Heenan's man Hercules Hernandez, and the match would be Ken Patera win by disqualification after both Bobby Heenan and Harley Race got involved in the match. But April 24th, 1987, Ken Patera's first match since his prison sentence.
Just arrest his parents.
Yeah.
Oh man, it was sound logic for the brain.
Whew. Yeah, but again, but everyone was supposed to boo Bobby Heenan.
Oh no! Not after that.
It was Bobby Heenan's fault that Ken Patera got locked up, even though
man.
I knew as a smart wrestling fan, Bobby Heenan wasn't even in the AWA.
I need to see that.
Ken Patera got arrested.
I need to see this.
Yes, watch. It was a debate first. Ken Patera and Bobby Heenan would have a debate where Bobby Heenan made all these salient points, and Ken Patera, who's gonna be later on in this segment of Wrestling Historian, great wrestler, never great on the mic. And as I said before, he kept saying the same thing. I'm just happy I paid my debt to society, and that I no longer had to be associated with people like you, Bobby Heenan. Crowd cheers. And Bobby Heenan's like, again, this man beat up police officers. I didn't tell him to do that. I wasn't anywhere near him when he did that. I didn't order him to do that. That was all Ken Patera's fault. Boo.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, April 24th, 1987, Ken Patera's first match after being let out of the Who's Gal. April 24th, 1989, New Japan held its first ever wrestling event at the Tokyo Dome. Tokyo Dome matches in New Japan, we all know have been a staple for many, many years. But the first one ever was in 1989. It had 44,000 people in the Tokyo Dome. 44,000. And they flew in Lou Thesz, long a hero in the Japanese wrestling community. They flew in Lou Thesz to be a special referee for some of the matches, and he was a special referee for the IWGP, that's International Wrestling Grand Prix tournament finals. They were crowning a new IWGP heavyweight champion, and in the finals, it was Big Van Vader defeated Shinya Hashimoto, and Lou Thesz flew in to be the special guest referee for the final. So Big Van Vader would win his first IWGP heavyweight title, and that was also the debut of Vader.
Oh, wow.
Also making his debut on that same card, the first ever Tokyo Dome show in front of 44,000 people in his first match, Jushin Thunder Liger.
Oh.
Would also make his debut.
Wow. So
two big Hall of Famers making their debuts in the first ever Tokyo Dome show, 44,000 plus, April 24th, 1989. April 24th, 1990, in TV taping in San Antonio, Texas, Roddy Piper would go up against his former Pacific Northwest Tag Team Championship partner, Rick Martel. They would fight to a double disqualification in the Intercontinental heavyweight title tournament. It's curious, Dan, because the night before, Kurt Hennig defeated Tito Santana to win the Intercontinental title.
Uh-huh.
So, again, this is a callback to last week's historian because I mentioned that Kurt Hennig defeated Tito Santana because someone wanted me to mention Tito Santana in the tournament final for the Intercontinental title. Well, the very next day, Roddy Piper and Rick Martel went to a double disqualification in the Intercontinental Tag Team in the Intercontinental Heavyweight Title tournament when the champion had been crowned the previous day.
Nice.
And speaking of TV tapings and last week's Wrestling Historian, I told you about the WCW Spring Stampede in 1994, and that was Ric Flair against Ricky Steamboat, and there was a double pin, and the title was held up. Well, April 24th, 1994, at the WCW TV taping, Ric Flair would defeat Ricky Steamboat to regain the WCW Heavyweight Title belt, and that, Dan, would be the last ever match between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat.
Oh, wow. TV taping? So when did it air?
I
don't know what show that would air it on.
I'm looking back on my notes. The Spring Stampede was forgive me, April 13th, 1994.
Okay, so TV taping 14. I gotta find that because I'd like to see that. It's gotta exist.
I'm sorry.
Right?
April 17th, 1994 was Spring Stampede, and that's where Flair and Steamboat the double pin. That was April 17th, and now April 24th, so a week later, was the TV taping. So I don't know when that aired, but that would be April 17th.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, so that was the last match. So that would culminate. The 1994 was their last match. Their first match was in 1977. So a 17-year feud, off and on, between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. Literally 1,000 matches, and I don't know how many one-hour draws, all up and down the East Coast in every arena from Philadelphia to New York to Charlotte Coliseum to Atlanta to Florida. But their final match ever took place in Texas, April 24th, 1994. Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat.
Found it.
Okay.
It aired on the Main Event.
Wow.
But it was recorded in April. It didn't air till July. So
okay.
No, I'm just saying you're correct. I'm just saying that I think they held it in the vault until. Oh, you can't see it because of my background. Damn it! Fail. But I have it, so I'm going to watch that. I don't think Main Events are on the network yet because there's a lot of good stuff that's still missing from the vaults that eventually they'll pop up there. But I'm going to watch that later. I needed to find that. But yeah, so they filmed it in April and showed it in July. That's crazy. That's crazy. What a random year for that to end.
Yeah, but the last one between two of the all-time greats, maybe the greatest, one of the greatest feuds in professional wrestling history. Certainly the feud with the best matches.
Yeah.
Flair and Steamboat, every Magic Clinic. And even though 17 years later it may not have been up to par as their house shows in the Carolinas, back where if you weren't there, you just missed it. Flair and Steamboat have said on many times they've had some amazing matches that weren't filmed. When they were doing 1 hour draws 4 or 5 times a week, up and down the Mid-Atlantic circuit, and they traded United States titles, Mid-Atlantic championships, Mid-Atlantic TV titles, and finally the World Championship, both the NWA and the WCW World titles. But that was their last one. April 25th, 1980. A big night in professional wrestling. Because remember I said about territories and how you can have different wrestlers from different federations? Well, April 25th in St. Louis, in the Kiel Auditorium, both the NWA and the WWF world titles were both defended. The NWA champion Harley Race defeated the aforementioned Ric Flair in an NWA title bout. And in the Alliteration title bout, WWF Heavyweight Champion Bob Backlund defeated Bulldog Bob Brown. Yes. So the NWA and the WWF champion both wrestled on that card. And if that weren't enough, and by God, don't you think it ought to be, on last week's, and again, callback, this is my callback episode of The Wrestling Historian. Last week, I said that April 21st, 1980, Ken Patera defeated Pat Patterson for the Intercontinental Heavyweight title. Well, April 25th, 1980, 4 days later, Ken Patera defeated Kevin Von Erich for the Missouri State Heavyweight Championship. So Ken Patera walked in holding a WWF championship, and he won an NWA championship.
Don't call it a callback.
And for most of that's called a callback. So for most of that summer of 1980, the summer of Patera, Ken Patera was both the Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion in the WWF and the Missouri State Champion in the NWA. Both titles were considered the number 2 titles in both federations. The Intercontinental title was the number 2 belt in the WWF, and the Missouri State Championship was considered the number 2 belt, not the United States title, the Missouri State Championship, because that's where the NWA offices were located in St. Louis. So when you wrestled in Missouri, it was a big deal. And being Missouri State champion almost anointed you. Remember I said last week, another callback, Bob Backlund won the Missouri State title from Harley Race in 1977. 1 year later, he was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion and would hold that belt for 5 years. So if you're a Missouri State champion, you were anointed a big deal. And the person he beat, Kevin Von Erich, was another person that was anointed earlier. So
slightly a big deal, yeah.
Yeah. So 4 days after winning the Intercontinental title, Ken Patera won the Missouri State Championship and would wrestle in both territories and defend the Intercontinental title in WWF and the Missouri State title in the NWA for most of that summer. So, can you imagine if the AEW champion, AWA TV title, would be defended in a WWF ring, or if someone held an AEW title being on the WWE show? The mind wobbles, because it wouldn't happen.
The mind wobbles, yeah.
But back in the day, folks, that was professional wrestling. As long as you can honor your commitments, as long as you can show up on time, as long as you are a good worker and could draw money, an NWA wrestler can hold a WWF title and vice versa. And Ken Patera was the first and the only wrestler to hold two singles belts in 2 different federations at the same time.
Damn. Gator is here, and you missed the Tito Santana reference, Gator. I'm sorry.
Yes, you're a bad Gator. But I did mention Tito Santana. Yeah, so Ken Patera, in 1980, was the top wrestler in the NWA and the WWF at the same time, and would later go to jail. So.
Well, listen, I need McDonald's.
Damn it. Yeah, I know you're close, but this boulder says otherwise. So, now you're open.
Boo, Tito Santana.
Yeah, so, Ken Patera is I told you Ken Patera is going to be part of this Wrestling Historian. There it was. Also, that same date, April 25th, 1992, and of all places, the Tabor Youth Association.
Sure, I know that place.
Well, that's where Jimmy Snuka, the aforementioned Jimmy Snuka, would defeat Sal Balomo to become the very first ECW heavyweight champion.
Oh, yeah.
Back when it was called the Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Yes.
Before it was Extreme. But on April 25th, 1992, Jimmy Snuka would be the first ECW champion.
We have a question. We have not a question. We have a comment from the internet live stream from one Mr. Gator, who just wanted a comment, and I guess you work off this. Imagine if they have Patera take the title off Backlund. Wrestling changes so much.
It does indeed. Ken Patera would have made he was a great heel, I don't know if he would have been a box office champion
Right.
because and putting the belt on a heel is very risky because the only time they did it at that point was with Superstar Billy Graham. But Superstar Billy Graham, while not the wrestler that Ken Patera was 8 times the promo that Ken Patera was,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Ken Patera by himself is not gonna in the main event is not gonna draw a sold out crowd. Superstar against anybody is gonna have a sold out crowd. Uh, what made Superstar great because even after he got the belt off Bruno was selling out arenas everywhere. So was Superstar. There was not a drop off in business at all. If anything, it got even bigger with Superstar. I don't see that one of the reasons why Camatera was never world champion in either in the NWA or the WWF. We mentioned a lot of times, Dan, about wrestlers that drew money, that were just great at getting heat. Guys like Roddy Piper, guys like the Sheik Ox Baker, but not everyone's supposed to be world champion.
Yeah.
And Ken Patera was one of those guys. Ken Patera is going to be a great Intercontinental champion. Ken Patera is going to be a great Missouri State champion.
Yep.
Ken Patera held titles everywhere he went. That's how good he was. He was the Rick Rude of his time. Everywhere that Rude went, he not only drew heat, he drew money, and he won titles. But Rick Rude was never, despite his later with WCW, but Rick Rude was never going to be an NWA champion. Just like Ken Patera, I don't think beating Backlund would have been good for business. Out of all the heels that went up against Backlund, and I'm going to talk about another heel that went up against Backlund later that was infinitely more popular than Ken Patera, how he could have been a world champion. But no slight to Ken Patera, he was not world championship material. He was main event heel material, and both the NWA and the WWF thought so at the same time that neither federation had any problem with him holding a belt from a rival company because they knew the guy could draw money. So even though Ken Patera walks into St. Louis Intercontinental Champion, and he never wore the belt in the NWA, and likewise when he wrestled in the WWF, he never wore the Missouri State Championship. Hell, before that, Ken Patera was a Mid-Atlantic heavyweight title, and he main evented Madison Square Garden against Tony Atlas while he was a Mid-Atlantic champion in the NWA. So it had been done before, but I hope that it was a long-winded answer to your question, Gator. Why Ken Patera was never world champion.
Long-winded and content. So continue, Craig. Can you?
Okay.
Hold on, Gator. We'll go. Hold on let him get through a few more stories, and I'll bring up that last thing you just made because that's awesome. Good.
Okay. April 26th. Back to Madison Square Garden. April 26th, 1976. Madison Square Garden, a packed show. Andre the Giant would defeat Ernie Ladd by countout. The aforementioned superstar Billy Graham and Ivan Koloff were in a tag team, even though both those guys were top contenders to Bruno Sammartino's heavyweight title. But the main event that night, Dan, April 26, 1976, was Bruno Sammartino defending the Worldwide Wrestling Federation heavyweight title against a 26-year-old rough, tough Texan who admitted he was a little nervous, and because of that, and because of those nerves, maybe misjudged the body slam. This was the night, April 26, 1976,
Oh, no.
where Stan Hansen broke the neck of Bruno Sammartino.
Jesus, I didn't know that was coming. I'm laughing about the nervousness. You're like, yeah, but he broke Bruno's neck, idiot.
Yeah, and this would he would give Bruno the lariat twice, and the referee stopped the match because of Bruno was bleeding.
Yeah.
But in actuality, and to get Stan Hansen and the lariat over, he said it was the lariat that broke Bruno's neck. Even though it was in fact the body slam where Stan dumped Bruno head first, and Bruno broke his neck on impact after the body slam, and and afterwards Hansen gave Bruno 2 lariats, and match was stopped because of Bruno's excessive bleeding. We later find out that Bruno, who had indeed a broken neck, would be out for 3 months. but and that would create the career, the stigma, the mystique of Stan Hansen. It all happened that night, April 26th, 1976. Also on that same card, I mentioned how stacked the card was. Andre, Ernie Ladd, superstar Ivan Koloff, but making his second appearance ever in Madison Square Garden, going up against Frankie Williams. You remember Frankie Williams from the Roddy Piper, got kicked off of Roddy Piper, but making his second appearance in Madison Square Garden and defeating Frankie Williams was one Ric Flair.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Since we're on the subject of Bruno, and like I said, having more viewers gets a little bit more interactive. Mr. Gator would also sends this message to you, Craig. Can I pitch you Larry Z beating Backlund for the title after his feud with Bruno? Question mark.
That would have been. That could have happened. That even if it was a transitional period, Larry Zbyszko was red hot, but and against other people, but he had the most sellouts with Bruno. Yeah. Even though right here in Philly, they had 20,000 people at the Spectrum against Larry Zbyszko against Bob Backlund, who was a world champion at the time, and that was during a blizzard.
Yeah,
and they still got 20,000 people. So that's an interesting possibility, Gator, if they ever thought of putting the belt on Zbyszko. But I know Zbyszko was turning heel was specifically for Bruno.
I was gonna say, even after his Hall of Fame induction, I still don't think he gets talked about enough. Larry is no. Zbyszko is. Only thing people talk about and remember is his stint on Nitro, where he was an okay color commentator. He was fine.
No,
a little too kayfabe. The game of chess. but as a wrestler, he was outstanding.
Yeah, and as a promo, he was outstanding. And Gator, you brought up that's a great point. But what I said, you remember what I said about Stan Hansen? That bout with Bruno made his whole career.
Yeah.
Larry turning on Bruno made his whole career. Because Larry Zbyszko as a face, bland, invisible. Larry Zbyszko, once he turned heel, that made his whole career, because not only was Larry Zbyszko selling out, being a heel, and against Bruno in Shea Stadium, August 9, 1980, that was the main event, Larry versus Bruno in a steel cage to blow off their feud. And Larry never beat Bruno once. Larry lost every single one of those matches, but his career was set. But the thing that made Larry Zbyszko, he went right to Georgia after that. And it was Larry Zbyszko who first bought a championship. It wasn't Ted DiBiase and Hulk Hogan. Larry Zbyszko went to Georgia when the TBS was the Superstation, and they were getting moon landing type numbers every Saturday night for their Georgia Championship Wrestling. The national heavyweight title was the top title there, and Killer Brooks beat Paul Orndorff for the national heavyweight title. And Larry Zbyszko, despite having lost his first match in Georgia to Tommy Rich, bought the title from Killer Brooks for $25,000, and then Larry Zbyszko was the national heavyweight champion. And when they stripped the belt off Zbyszko, they held a tournament. Larry Zbyszko won the tournament to be the national heavyweight champion. So he was even bigger heel. And that's what set him up. And from there, the AWA, he would be the AWA heavyweight champion, one of the last AWA heavyweight champions. But it set up his entire career thanks to Bruno. Had they put the belt on him with Backlund, I think he would have been a good transitional champion. But I think he worked. He wouldn't have been a good long-term solution. I think if Backlund had dropped the belt to him, and he got it back later on, but he would have been an interesting choice as world champion, because he was drawing a lot of sellouts after turning on Bruno. He was the number one heel in maybe in all of wrestling back then. So he might have been a good option, Gator. Good choice. But that was Stan Hansen's coming out party. That was what made his career, 1976 in Madison Square Garden. 6 years later, in 1982, also in Madison Square Garden, making his Madison Square Garden debut, in a title match, Bob Backlund would face Jimmy Snuka in his first match in Madison Square Garden. And Jimmy Snuka would win the bout because Bob Backlund was disqualified because he wouldn't quit choking Jimmy Snuka because Jimmy Snuka had attacked his manager, Arnold Skolin. But Jimmy Snuka turned the tables and gave Bob Backlund the patented Superfly Splash.
How dare you?
And so devastating, this is vintage Snuka, when he did it across the ring, Bob Backlund had to be carried out on a stretcher.
How dare you?
And that would be the first of 3 straight matches that Backlund and Snuka would have, culminating in Snuka diving off the steel cage on Bob Backlund the first time Jimmy Snuka jumped off the cage. Everyone remembers him against Morocco, but the first time Snuka had jumped off the cage was against Bob Backlund. Even though he missed, that was the biggest story of 1982.
It would be the first time someone got on a stretcher after dealing with Snuka. Thank you.
But that was Jimmy Snuka's match. But both guys made their Madison Square Garden debut. Stan Hansen against Bruno in 1976, and Jimmy Snuka against Bob Backlund in 1982. Both men making auspicious Madison Square Garden debuts in world title matches, and would leave both champions the worse for wear. Backlund being stretchered out, and of course Bruno with that pesky broken neck. April 27th, 1957, again in St. Louis, where it seems history is always being made. But in April 27th, 1957, Dan, in St. Louis, June Byers would team up with China Mira to go up against the team of Penny Banner and Bonnie Watson. And that would be the first tag team match involving women in professional wrestling history.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Well, it comes with a caveat. The first time in the United States that women had tag team wrestling, because apparently this had already happened in Japan.
Of course it did.
But they're always ahead of us. But the first match...
We're number 1! Oh, no.
No, we're not.
Only in diseases.
The first women's tag team match in United States history took place April 27, 1957 in St. Louis. June Byers and China Mira and Penny Banner and Bonnie Watson all made history. April 27th, 1981 in Augusta, Georgia. History is also made, Dan, in the NWA, because April 27th, 1981, Tommy Rich would defeat Harley Race for the NWA Heavyweight Championship. This, some would say, was as a favor to Jim Barnett. Tommy Rich had been the number 1 babyface in Georgia, and as a favor to the promoter for all the sold-out shows that Tommy Rich had, Tommy Rich was given the NWA title, defeating Harley Race. And that would legitimize Tommy Rich. Tommy Rich would go everywhere he went. He would be billed as the former NWA champion. And that would continue Tommy Rich's epic run in Georgia and in the South. Even when he turned heel, he would always be referred to as the NWA champion. And Tommy Rich beating Harley Race, of all people, because Harley Race didn't get beat. And getting the belt off Harley Race was no small feat. Many wrestlers before him had never even came close to beating him. But on this night, April 27th in Augusta, Georgia, and one of the people to greet him after Tommy Rich defeated Harley Race with the Thez press, the wrestlers flooded the ring to congratulate Tommy. One of them was Andre the Giant.
Oh, very nice.
So Andre the Giant was in Augusta, Georgia, of all places, April 27th, 1981, when Tommy Rich defeated Harley Race for the NWA title, the only world title of Tommy Rich's career.
Wow, really?
Yes. Tommy Rich would never hold the NWA title again. Like I said, remember how many times we talked about great wrestlers and world champions? They've only held it once. Terry Funk, one of the greatest world champions of all time, only held it once. Dory Funk only held the NWA title once.
Yeah, man.
Randy Savage is always applauded as one of the greatest intercontinental champions of all time. Guess what? Only held it once. So a single title win can make an entire career, and that's what they did for Tommy Rich, April 27th, 1981. Well, 6 years later, Dan, to the day, April 27th, 1987, at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, Tennessee, maybe one of, if not the greatest, not greatest, but most controversial, most popular, most oh my God moments in Memphis wrestling history took place when Austin Idol defeated Jerry Lawler for the Southern Heavyweight title in a cage match. Now, Austin Idol's manager at the time, one Paul E. Dangerously, guaranteed that if Austin Idol lost, he would refund the money for every single patron in the Mid-South Coliseum. He will refund all their money. Had a bag full of cash he brought to ringside. Now, the cage, well, now there have been cage matches in Memphis before, but this cage was so big it surrounded the entire ringside area. So, Austin Idol will go up against Jerry Lawler, and Paul Lee was at ringside, but under the ring the entire time after the referee got knocked down, who would come out from under the ring but Tommy Rich? And he and Austin Idol would proceed to beat the holy hell out of Jerry Lawler, shave his head, post him, and Austin Idol would win the Southern Heavyweight title. Now, Tommy Rich had flown in from Japan that morning and camped out under the ring in Memphis the entire day.
I was going to say, is this one of those things where they stayed under the ring all day until the moment?
All day, Dan, with nothing but
fried chicken,
an air mattress, and a 6-pack of beer.
Yes, it wasn't even chicken, it was beer.
It was beer. So when Tommy Rich emerged from under the ring to help Austin Idol defeat Jerry Lawler, and this caused one of the biggest riots, and Memphis, who's been known for riots in wrestling, especially when their faces are getting their butts handed to them. Fans were climbing on the ring, on the cage, trying to get in. Many beers, glass bottles were thrown at both Paul Dangerously, Tommy Rich, and Austin Idol. To this day, I don't even know how they made it back to the dressing room, let alone out of the arena. But this was one of the most traded and bought tapes in the indie wrestling scene, because they made that whole, not just the whole card, that whole match on VHS tape, and they would sell that tape in after magazines for $25, and in indie shows and house shows they would still sell it even 10 years to the day after it happened. When they go to ECW Arena, that match in Memphis, April 27, 1987, with Austin Idol, Tommy Rich, and Paul E. Dangerously shaving the head of Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler had never lost a hair match.
About time.
He lost the Southern title. He got posted. His groin ruptured, even though that was because he had a vasectomy.
Didn't help.
While he was out of the. But yeah, that was the another thing. YouTube it. Paul Lee and Paul Dangerously, Austin Idol, and Tommy Rich against Jerry Lawler. You fear for their lives, legitimately, when you saw the fans climbing on the ring and not enough policemen there to stop all the fans from trying to get in the ring to help out Jerry Lawler, who sold like a champ. But yeah, so 6 years after Tommy Rich won the NWA title, he camped out under a ring for 12 hours to help out in the ring, to help Austin Idol beat Jerry Lawler for the Southern Heavyweight title.
Gator did it once for a whole hour.
Under the ring?
Yeah. For an hour. For an hour. Not 12.
Yeah.
Just an hour.
Not 12.
No.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Imagine flying in from Japan and get right to the arena. Okay, we need you under the ring, Tommy. Yeah.
Hey, we got beer. Okay.
We got an air mattress. Okay.
Okay, I'll take a nap. That's funny. Yeah, you could just lay back and.
So you know the match isn't going to start for another 6 hours. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Bye.
Wait for
See
your
ya.
cue. I wonder what the cue was.
I think if you look at it again, you saw Paulie say something.
Yeah.
To Yeah,
Because,
I hope he didn't wake him up.
well, I was gonna say, because you assume that okay, you fly from Japan, he's gonna be tired, even though he's done it a bunch of times. You know he's gonna be tired, so he probably took a nap. So something had to happen for him to go.
Oh,
Oh, it's my turn.
It's my
Yeah.
cue. Yeah.
Oh, I woke up.
Wake up, Tommy. Tommy.
Hello.
Hello. Got to slow that crowd here. We're getting kind of anxious.
Yeah.
Easy,
Hey,
buddy.
anytime. Not the China timing on that one match where it's like, go over there.
Yeah. That same day, April 27th, 2002, an emotional goodbye that took place right here, Philadelphia. The Ring of Honor tribute to Eddie Guerrero.
Oh, God.
Eddie was the current Intercontinental Champion for the WWF, but he still came back to the Ring of Honor for his final farewell bout. He teamed up with the Amazing Red to go up against the SAT.
Amazing Red, man.
Yeah. Joel and I forget the Maximo brothers, SAT. They were my favorite indie tag team at the time.
Nice.
And they went against Amazing Red and Eddie. Eddie won the match, and he even wore the Intercontinental belt to the ring.
Doyce.
And he gave a nice speech to the crowd, and he even thanked, of all people, Rob Feinstein. Ooh. Controversy aside, Eddie said Rob Feinstein was the only guy after I got fired from the WWF and after I got out of rehab. Rob Feinstein was the only guy to book me on matches at indie cards. So he credited him on his comeback trail. So for that reason alone, we thank Rob Feinstein. But Eddie also said that he will always consider Philadelphia home because he got his first national break in ECW at the ECW Arena.
Never mind.
And Ring of Honor gave him a chance to shine. It was with Ring of Honor that he got to wrestle Ray without the mask against his match with Ray and CM Punk was one of the great matches of 2001.
Sure.
Their triple threat match. But that was Eddie's tribute, his last match in Ring of Honor. But making his debut on that same card, remember I said about big card and the guys made their debut, making his debut at Ring of Honor, beating Low Key, was AJ Styles.
Who's who of wrestling the last 10 years? Less said about our Rob Feinstein, the better. And it's not like I can say anything. He's already had me blocked on Twitter.
Yeah. But I was saying controversy aside, and it was Eddie's moment.
Yeah.
We're not going to cast versions that we have a whole other podcast on how we feel about Rob Feinstein.
No, we won't. We won't give him the time.
We will not give him time. He's not worth it.
Nope.
But that was a very emotional day in Philadelphia, April 27, 2002. And Eddie's always had a soft spot. And after his passing, I went to a PW show. It was the week after he had gone. I was wearing an Eddie shirt. And the SAT pointed at me. I was at ring, and they saw my shirt. And they both came over and gave me a big hug because they loved my shirt. So I always had love for those guys.
He used to get the loudest reactions at WCW house shows at the Spectrum in the mid to late 90s. I mean, because I remember the last one particularly at the that's not the last one. I remember the last time I saw the two of them together at a WCW show was the December 98 house show at the Spectrum, and I'm sure you were there. But one of the main events was Malenko and Benoit versus Eddie and Jericho. And it's like Eddie and Jericho came out. Philly didn't care that they were heels. Didn't give a damn. Because you have, first of all, it's Eddie Guerrero. It's still 98, but you still have Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho. But you have their ECW
contingent
history to behind them already. Then you have the internet rumors of what was going on at WCW. they were not the heels in that match. They wrestled
No.
like it, but that music hit, and I can still see in my head because I was actually it's the only time I've sat behind the entrance
Hmm.
was at this particular show. So this one in my memory is particularly stuck because I just watched the guys walk out from behind.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that sound for those two is second to none, no matter heel or face. No
I
way.
was at the Civic Center for their first match in WC for Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit's first match
Oh
in
wow,
WCW since they left ECW, and they were the opening bout.
wow.
So it was just Eddie versus Chris. There wasn't a face or a heel,
Yeah,
and the place went nuts. And
yeah,
they were the opening bout, and all you heard was ECW chants the whole time.
yeah.
Now the thing it was, I don't know if it was their rhythm or their timing. They didn't have their best match. I think Eddie might have legitimately hurt his arm
Oh,
during the
probably.
bout, and he walked it off. But this is all the ECW chants were up top. It was an all WCW crowd, so they were like, "Who the hell are these guys?"
Oh, you just wait.
Like, "Oh, you effing idiots!" But I was at their first match in Philly after they left ECW
Yeah,
at the WCW house show, and they were the first bout, and it was yeah, seeing those guys back in Philly, always a treat. But yeah,
amazing.
that I remember that bout in Benoit and Malenko were the WCW tag team champions and or on their way, and they were supposed to be the faces, and like Eddie and Jericho were not gonna get booed in Philly.
No,
I
no,
knew that.
never, never. Maybe the first show they did,
Hmm.
but after that it was.
Yeah. One I forgot, going back to April 26th, happy belated 53rd birthday to Glenn Jacobs.
The mayor of.
Yes.
Keep having technical
Former,
difficulties accidentally going to the be right back screen. Sorry, folks. But
yes.
former, go ahead.
Former Unabomb, former Isaac Yankem,
Right, he was the Unabomber. Stupid name.
former Fake Diesel, former tag team partner of the Great Al Snow, and former Jim Cornette Discovery. You know, it
Yeah.
was Jim Cornette that brought the Undertaker down during the Smoky Mountain match and said, "Hey, this guy could you could do some. I want you to just give him a match and see how you feel." And Undertaker came back afterwards and said, "Yeah, you definitely make a lot of money with this guy." And Jim Cornette was right. He liked the big guys, like the big guys who could move, and Glenn Jacobs was one of them. Um, but yes, he's carved out quite the career for himself as Kane, obviously his greatest creation out of all the characters he's played.
What's amazing about that is I think he was in the business 10 years before he was even Kane.
Yeah,
Or just under 10 years. And then you have, what, another 22 years as Kane? Maybe more?
yeah,
Insane.
hmm yeah, it's insane.
That's insane.
And speaking of guys that later on in this segment, but another guy who had another big guy that had a lot of aliases. But we're going to move on. April 28th, 1995, the largest crowd ever to attend a pro wrestling event happened in Pyongyang, North Korea,
Oh,
at
that's.
Pyongyang Stadium. 150,000 people in North Korea. And some of the matches on the card was Wild Pegasus was on that card. Chris Benoit, before mentioned. Too Cold Scorpio was also on that crowd. But the main event that night was the IWGP International Wrestling Grand Prix that I mentioned earlier. Champion Shinya Hashimoto defeated Scott Norton in the main event in front of 150,000 people, the largest crowd ever to attend a pro wrestling event at the time. April 28th, 1996, WWF In Your House pay-per-view. Vader defeated Razor Ramon. Ramon, of all things, tried to do a sunset flip on Vader, and Vader just sat out and pinned him. Also on that card, the WWF champion Shawn Michaels would defeat Diesel, man of many names. This is also the card where during the match, Diesel, who is now a heel, pulled off the prosthetic leg of Mad Dog Bashan
That's right.
and proceeded to beat Shawn Michaels with it.
Amazing.
I brought this up because this would be the final pay-per-view WWE appearance of both Razor Ramon and Diesel in the WWF. The curtain call forthcoming.
Yes.
April 28th, 1997, 1 year later, Owen Hart would defeat Rocky Maivia for the Intercontinental Heavyweight Championship, thus ending the first title reign of The Rock. And April 28th, that same day, 2002, we said goodbye to a legend I mentioned earlier. Lou Thesz was flown out to Japan back in April of 1989 to be the special guest referee. Well, 13 years later, and at the age of 86, we had to say goodbye to Lou Thesz. After triple bypass heart surgery, one of the toughest SOBs in the history of professional wrestling, took his final bow. Lou Thesz, who wrestled all the way up until age 70, and would wrestle in his 60s, wrestled guys such as Antonio Inoki, and Tommy Saruta. He was just a legit tough man, even wrestling in his 50s in the old IWA. I remember watching Lou Thesz wrestle. He teamed up with Mil Mascaras in 1975 in a wrestling match. He was also the special guest referee when Nick Bockwinkel lost the AWA title to Jumbo Saruta. He was special guest referee for the Roddy Piper versus Jimmy Snuka match in St. Louis. Even though it was a WWF card, Lou Thesz and St. Louis was synonymous, so he was the special referee for the St. Louis crowd for that. But at the time, a 6-time NWA champion, a record that every professional wrestler, fan, and wrestler alike thought would never be broken. Who would ever hold the NWA title or any world title 6 times? But Lou Thesz did it, and he won his first bout and won his first championship when he was only 21. Lou Thesz would also be indirectly responsible for the creation of the WWF because his win over Buddy Rogers wasn't recognized in the northeastern states because Buddy Rogers didn't want to travel as the NWA champion. But so Lou Thesz's win over Buddy Rogers would indirectly start the WWF. But just an incredible wrestler, an incredible performer. He was also a household name. He wrestled during the golden age of TV, yes. So he was also on television quite a bit. And being the NWA champion back when the NWA was the largest pro wrestling governing body in the United States, it was him who said or goes who would be the next champion and who he would drop the belt to, because if Lou Thesz didn't want to lose, Lou Thesz didn't lose.
We always talk about you not liking the newer stuff, or someone not liking the newer stuff, or how you feel about something older or new. And right in the middle of Hogan's Hollywood Hogan run is when that A&E Secrets of Pro Wrestling documentary came out, and it interviewed everybody who was a legend who was able to do interviews. Vern Gagne was on it. I believe Bruno's on it. Current stars at the time, WWF, WCW footage, and Lou Thesz was one of the guys they interviewed. Yeah. And I'll never forget that man said of Hulk Hogan that my grandmother couldn't drop a better leg drop than Hulk Hogan. And I never forgot that.
Yeah, well, that's true. And Hogan would tell you that too.
Yeah, but I just thought it was funny that, we cut to 25 years later. Everybody acts like everything's brand new, and how dare this? It's the save cycle. The guys who are older don't like what's newer. I just happen to agree with Lou on this one.
Yeah.
In fact, Big Vito drops a better leg drop than Hulk Hogan.
Yes, Bobby Eaton drops a better leg drop than Hulk Hogan, and Eaton did it longer and better.
Yes,
but Lou Thesz, we say goodbye to him at the age of 86 in 2002, which we now know is very old for a wrestler.
Yes, yeah. You said it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the same date, April 28th, we also had to say goodbye to someone way before their time. Um, April 28th, 2005 was the day we said goodbye to Chris Candido
Oh, fudge.
at the age of 33 in one of the most freak and then one of the most, Dan, because we're both pro wrestling fans, we never get used to hearing about a wrestler leaving before their time, and we hear like, really? What? Chris Candido's death is still one of the. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Because he was on TV 48 hours earlier
Yeah.
that Tuesday at a TNA taping. He had broken his leg in a freak accident with Sonny Siaki. I think it was during a dropkick.
Yeah.
He went in for surgery. The surgery was successful. He was going to get some pins in his leg and his rod and his ankle. And then 2 days later, he's dead. What? Absolutely, still shocked. He would be 48 right now if he was still here.
It's not one of those wrestlers that died from nefarious reasons or drugs or alcohol. It's just somebody that went. It was just time. It's just so odd to still hear those words to this day. And I will do the normal thing I do if somebody's listening to this and they do not know the body of work of one Chris Candido. You owe it to yourself.
Yeah. Do yourself a favor. If you claim to be a fan of professional wrestling, acquaint yourself with Chris Candido. Because not only could the guy go, the guy could talk, the guy was a great face, the guy was an incredible heel. He could just do everything. And for better or for worse, he introduced us to his wife, Sunny.
I mean, for better.
Yeah.
Not my problem. It's for better for me. Thank you for Raw Magazine.
Yes. But again, another Jim Cornette, not discovery, but someone that Jim Cornette made so bankable and so popular and so signable. It was Chris Candido's run in Smoky Mountain that got him hired into the WWF.
Yep.
In that god-awful Body Donna's gimmick. This is back when fitness was all the rage. So he was given a Susan Powder haircut, and he and his then wife, Sunny, would promote themselves as the fitness champions, Body Donnas.
I'm at the spot where she's screwing with the Phineas and
the Godwins. I don't know why that Chris Candido of all people had to be the sacrificial lamb to give Barry Horowitz a push of all people, but Chris Candido and that Jim Cornette showed, and with other people you could make a lot of money with Chris Candido. That Paul Heyman showed in ECW, that Jim Cornette showed in Smoky Mountain. Had the WWF had any sense to push a guy that's not 6 foot tall, they could have made that same type of money with Chris Candido.
Yep.
But unfortunately, he left us too soon, April 28th, 2005, at the age of 23. Which brings us to today. Remember way back, Dan, when I said April 28th, 1995 was the largest crowd to ever attend a professional wrestling match?
I certainly do.
Well, that record was broken today, one day later, April 29th, 1995. The largest crowd ever to attend a pro wrestling match in Pyongyang Stadium in North Korea. 190,000 fans came out in attendance. One of the bouts on that card was Wild Pegasus and a Chris Benoit in a mask. Went up against Too Cold Scorpio. But the main event was the first, last, and only meeting between Antonio Inoki and Ric Flair.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's right. I saw trailers for that on the Great American Bash tape from 1995, and I've still not seen that show.
Yeah. 190,000 people there. Still a record will probably never be broken, at least not in the United States.
No.
But the largest crowd ever to see a professional wrestling match took place on this date 25 years ago.
Sir, it might be a little while before any attendance records are broken.
Yes.
For a very long time.
For a very long time. But back 1995, at least in North Korea, you can get 190,000 people to a wrestling match. And it happened. Also on this date, 1998, to get a lot of people to go to a wrestling match, especially for a good cause. And this is one of the last times that you saw wrestlers from other territories, from other companies, wrestling on the same card. But on this date, 1998, was the first annual Brian Pillman Memorial event that took place in Brian's home state of Ohio, put on by Les Thatcher, Brian Pillman's old wrestling trainer, and hosted by Stone Cold Steve Austin, Brian Pillman's best friend, and the aforementioned Sonny.
Okay.
They were the hosts, but you had ECW matches. Al Snow went up against, get this, Chris Candido. And from the WWE, Chris Benoit went up against Chris Jericho.
Nice.
So that was the Brian Pillman, the first annual Brian Pillman Memorial event. This will go on until 2001, but the first one was on this date, 1998. And also on this date, 1999, was the first ever television debut of this new show called SmackDown.
UPN.
Yes, so UPN. The main event, Triple H and The Undertaker went up against Stone Cold Steve Austin and the guy who came up with the term SmackDown, The Rock. They did a 5.8 rating for their debut.
Man, Thunder, Nitro, SmackDown, Raw.
Yep.
Remember when we said we'd love to see more wrestling, and now we're like, maybe not.
But I also, for our final, I also want to wish a happy 60th birthday to maybe the prettiest member ever of the Four Horsemen. Happy birthday, Paul Roma.
Oh, God. No. No.
Pretty Paul Roma.
No, never again. Never mentioned him on the show.
Both the prettiest and worst member of the entire history of the Four Horsemen.
I just like that they randomly trash him on that Ric Flair Four Horsemen DVD. Like, wait, what did he ever do to you? Leave him alone. You leave Paul alone.
Yeah, even Triple H going, really, Paul Roman?
Really?
The job guy from
WWE?
Yeah.
You were a job guy at 1.2, son.
Yeah, terrorizing.
Jean-Paul Levesque.
Jean-Paul Levesque.
Yeah.
And that, gentlemen and ladies, is what's called the Wrestling Historian.
And that is the end of the episode. Craig, where can people follow you?
They can follow me if they so choose on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter at Craig Ligon, CraigLigeons.
Follow me at DanLaw83. If you want to find the episodes on your Apple or Android phone, type in VOC Nation Radio on your podcast platforming app, whatever you use, or Facebook Live, Twitter Live, Periscope, Twitch Live. Just search DanLaw83 or YouTube DanLaw83 and watch the episodes there. For Craig Ligons, I'm Dan Calchico, the above average. Forget it. See ya.